Hello, and welcome to everyone who is here. I think I'm live. I don't know. Yep, I think I'm live. Okay. So I want to start by saying I'm going to teach you how to format your novel. And so I wanted to just say good morning and good afternoon and good evening wherever you are in the world. Welcome to QuaranCon 2021. I'm going to show you how I use Microsoft Word and how I use InDesign in order to format my novel. And I want to preface this by saying I understand that Microsoft Word and InDesign are both programs where it's a subscription, so you might have to pay for it. However, I'm going to spend the majority of time on Word, Microsoft Word, and I'm fairly certain that a lot of what I'm going to go over should be accessible and easy to format using any word processing software that you may have, like Google Docs or some other software, with the exception of Scrivener, which is its own software, its own program. So, I won't be going, some of the stuff that I have here won't necessarily translate to Scrivener, but it just translates to any word processing program that you use. So I want to get a few things out of the way before I get started, because this is going to be a lot that I'm going to go over in as short amount of time as possible. The first thing is this is going to be showing you how to format your book for print, meaning that you're going to hold the book in your hand, the physical copy. It's not going to be going over ebook, because for that, there are many free programs that you can easily download and it will do it for you. It will format the Mobi file, the EPUB file, whatever file that you need. So this is just going to be if you want to upload a PDF into, let's say, Amazon KDP, and you want to have your book in your hand, this is what I'm going to show you how to do, because this is what I do for myself with any novel that I've written and published. So the point of this is really going to be less about the program and more about the different things that you need to know to format your book and make it look like one of the top 5 publishers have. So you want to make sure that there are certain rules that you're following in terms of the formatting to make it look, you know, like a professional did it. And the one of the last things I want to mention is, if you can afford for someone to format your book, by all means, that's what you should do. I love doing this. I've been doing this for, almost a decade now. So this is something that I could probably do with my eyes closed, because I've been doing it for so long. What might take you several hours or days to do, once I show you what the process is, for me, it takes less than an hour, sometimes less than 30 minutes. Again, because I've been doing it for so long. But I always recommend that you spend more time on your novel than you do on formatting it. So if you can afford to pay someone to format your novel, I recommend doing that. But in the meantime, if you want to save a bit of money to put that towards an editor or a cover designer or any other aspect of your novel, I'm going to show you how you can do it yourself. And it's not that difficult. It just is a lot of information that you need to know to get your novel to the place that it needs to be to have a print copy of it. So what I'm going to teach you today, and what I hope you will learn and know by the end of this workshop, is the parts of a book. So I'm going to go over the front matter, the manuscript, and the back matter, the dimensions of your book that you need to know before starting the final format, because it's going to help you answer what I deem to be 3 really key questions. The first one is the number of pages for your book. And you need to know the number of pages if you design the cover yourself. And I don't recommend that. But if you do, you need to know the number of pages so that you could, one, know the inside margins, the gutter, which we'll go over in a minute, but also so that you can know the width of your spine, because you need to know the width of your spine when you're designing the cover, the front, the spine, and the back cover. And also, like I said, it helps you know what the margins need to be for the formatting of your book, depending on your trim size. I'm also giving you a checklist that you can download for free that's going to be going over literally everything I'm going to be discussing right now. So if you look in the description down below of this video, you will see a link to a Google Doc where you could click on it. Just go to File and click Make a copy or download a copy, and boom, you got it. And you can use this, because I use it, to check off and make sure that I'm doing everything in a specific order. It helps me if I step away from my computer and I come back and I'm trying to remember, oh, what step did I do? What did I leave off on? What do I have left to do in order to complete this? So a checklist I find is always helpful to have in any process that you're doing, especially if it's a repetitive one, but it's not one you're doing every single day. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into sharing my screen, and I'm going to show you Word. Now I'm going to show you one of the very first novels that I formatted myself. So it's already formatted, but I'm still going to go over the steps of how I got it to look this particular way. But I figured it would be easy for me to just show you this and just go through it step by step. So let me just open this up. Okay, so what you have here is a book that I wrote called Daxton. And one of the first things that you're going to want to do, that I always recommend, is make sure you have your final manuscript. And what I mean by that is you may have several versions of your manuscript. And the last thing you want to do is start this process and realize that you did all of this work and it was on a rough draft or the second draft and not the final draft. So make sure that you have the right manuscript. Something else that I want to stress is indenting your paragraph. So some people will go by the default that Microsoft Word or any writing word processing software have, which is 0.5 inches. It should be 0.3 inches. And one of the things that I recommend that you do, that I did before I even started the process of how the heck do I format my novel, go to your bookshelf, pull down as many books that are your favorite, that are the most eye-catching and appealing, and bring them with you to your desk. And so I have a few right here that I just grabbed because I have them here with me. So one of the things that I did, for example, is I grabbed a soft cover paperback book, right? So I grab it, I open it up, and I look at certain aspects of it. Where do they have their page numbers? Do they list the title of the book where, in the top or in the header or in the footer? Do they put the author's name? If so, where do they put it? Different things like that. Again, like with the indenting, I noticed that it wasn't 0.5 inches. I said, okay, if this isn't 0.5 inches, what is it? And I did, my research to find out it's 0.3 inches. So those are little things that you want to make sure that you implement when you print or when you work on formatting your book, because you want whoever picks it up to look at it and know right off the bat that this person put a lot of love and attention into it, and that they're going to want to read your book because it's going to look and feel like any other book that they may already have on their bookshelf. So I highly recommend, especially with trim sizes. So if you want to, right off the bat decide what dimensions do I want my book to be, what is 8.5 look like? What does 8 by 5 look like? What is that? And literally grab a ruler and grab what your favorite books are from paperback or hardback and measure the length and the width, because that is going to help you when you move forward with formatting your book. You need to know what your trim size is. But like I said, one of the first things you're going to want to do is make sure all your paragraphs are indented properly. And that's one of the steps that we're going to go over in a minute. But something else that you want to do before you, again, start formatting, at the end of your chapters, make sure you include page breaks. Don't get to the end of your chapter. For example, I will scroll down here to show you when I go from the end of chapter 1 on the left page to the beginning of chapter 2. Don't hit enter multiple times until you get your second chapter on the next page. And the reason why you don't want to do that is because that could totally make everything funky when you start to do your formatting. You want to make sure, without a doubt, that your chapters start on the next page. And the way to do that is to make sure you put a page break at the end of each chapter. And you should get into the habit of doing that just naturally if you're writing in Word. When you're going Scrivener, you don't have to worry about that because you do it, it's broken out into separate sections and things like that. So the measurements for the spine, Christy, I see your question as I look over at the chat. We're going to go into all of that stuff. It's actually I have a link for it in the download that you can just download for Word formatting steps on where you can go to figure out the calculations for your spine. It's really fairly simple, so don't freak out too much about that. I can help you on how that works, no problem. Because if trust me, it freaked me out too, and I actually had to do several author proofs because I wasn't calculating it correctly, and I noticed that the spine was bleeding over the front and the back cover. So something else that you want to have. So you want to make sure your paragraphs are indented 0.3 inches. You want to make sure you've got those page breaks at the end of each chapter, and you want to already know, once you have your final manuscript, what your front matter and back matter is going to be inclusive of. And the reason why I say you want to have that ahead of time is because you don't want to have to stop doing all of these processes of putting in numbers and things to stop and write your author bio, or to stop and write, an acknowledgements. You want to already have that because, again, if you look at your favorite author, typically, if they have a series of books, their acknowledgments or their learn more or their, about the author page is the same. They may change a few things, but it's identical. So you want to have that ahead of time. And my recommendation is write out what you want to have in your front matter and your back matter, give it each a separate file name, and then add the word template to that file name so that when you start a new book, start a new series, whatever the case may be, open that template up, hit save as, and then include the name of the book that you're going to attach it to. So that way you're not reinventing the wheel every time. So your author bio is typically going to stay the same for a while unless you have a drastic change in your life that you want to include in there, or you have a social media link you want to add in there, whatever the case may be. Don't rewrite the whole thing. Open up the template, make whatever changes you want to make to it, save it as a template, but then hit save as when you're creating that new format for your next new novel. Then the last thing you want to do before we get started on all of this stuff, grab some tea, coffee, water, whatever it is. I've got my water here because you're going to want to try to do this as best as you can in one sitting. Because like I said, if you get up and walk away and you get distracted, you may come back and not remember where you left off, which is again why I have the checklist. Because as long as you're checking these things off, then you won't forget where you left off and you'll be able to pick up and go with the motions. But I always recommend that you try as best as you can to block off about an hour or two to really sit down and get this whole thing done and know that it's done and not have any sort of, maybe a bathroom break, but don't try to do a break where you're gone for several hours and then you come back. You may lose your momentum. You may lose your place. You may get frustrated and feel like you have to start from the beginning again. And we don't want that to happen. So one of the first things we're going to do this step is really one that you're only going to do one time and that's it. So it may seem very daunting, but like I said, you're only going to do it once and you should technically never have to do this step again. And the first one involves picking your trim size. Okay. So you're going to want to know right off the bat, what you want your trim size to be, and think about this, right? Because I'm a fantasy author. So I already know in my mind that my first book is going to be a series, right? So I'm visualizing what does that look like on the bookshelf. I'm looking at my books and I'm seeing my Terry Pratchett, series of 39 books, or I'm looking at the complete collection that I have of, Brian Jack's Redwall and his, 42 books, and how that looks beautiful on the shelf with the spine and everything is lined up and the height is the same. So you want to make sure whatever you pick that you love that dimension, because you're going to want the series, whatever the case may be, to all be the same. So if you don't like it, don't pick it. And if you look at the download that I give you, if you scroll down to the last page, which is reference images and links, you will see that I took a screenshot of what trim sizes you should use. It's the second screenshot on there, the recommended trim sizes. So what you'll want to look at is, those are the ones that this is coming from Amazon KDP. So these are like the recommended trim sizes that you should use, and it's the only ones that they offer, which is important to note because a lot of people use Amazon KDP. So you don't want to pick up a book, do the measurements, and find out they have a separate printing press. They don't use Amazon, they use someone else, so they could create their own margins and it may not line up with what you want. So you want to make sure whatever one you like, that it comes as close to what they have on their list as possible. So once you pick your trim size, basically the page count is only relevant depending on like how big you want your margins to be. So pay attention to that. If you're doing a tome of, like several hundreds of pages, 5, 6, 700 pages, just make sure that they are able to accommodate that number of pages, because if they're not, that could cause a problem, and you may want to then switch over to a different printer that's not Amazon KDP, that's like Ingram Spark, that might be able to handle more pages than they can handle, but it might be a bit costly. So in this instance, it's, free to upload the file and so on. So you want to make sure you pick one of those. I go with I believe it's 8.5 by 5, or it's 8 by 5.5. I always get confused, but I already have it set up. So my confusion doesn't need to be remembered, because like I said, you do it once, you never have to do it again. So what we're going to do is you would go to Word, and then you would go to File and Page Setup. And so mine is actually 5.25 by 8 inches now that I'm looking at what it is. So you would just manage custom sizes, and I'm hoping that this is showing on the screen. I did not do a test on if it's going to show this window to you. It is. Oh, great. Okay. So what you'll see here is I already have paperback novel as one of the settings that I created. And if you do hardback, you might want to add a new one and hit the plus button down in the corner. And then you would create, the margins that you want, and then name it hardback novel. Because usually your hardback is a different dimension and a different size than your paperback. For me, I'm not doing hardback because I would need to go to Ingram Spark. And like I said, Ingram Spark costs money. So for right now, I only do paperback novels. And so I've already got the 5.25 by 8 inches. That's really all you need to do here. You don't really need to worry about the non-printable area because you're not printing this yourself. So this is not important. All you really need to make sure is that your paper size is whatever you want your trim size to be when you get this book in hand. Hold on one second. I'm trying to fit this to my screen. Okay. So the next thing now we're going to want to do is set up our margins, which is the part that, again, is the most important. Now, the reason why I have you format the pages and do the, the indentation and do like all of those things ahead of time is because once you format your page setup to be the dimensions that you want, you're going to notice that your page count is going to increase drastically, because typically when you open up Word or any other word processing program, you're already presented with an 8.5 by 11 inch page. So obviously that means there's going to be more words and things fitting on that page. But the second you take that page and shrink it down to what you want your actual book to be printed in, then you'll notice you might go from having like a 100-page manuscript to having a 400-page manuscript because you did that. So in this case, my manuscript is 334 pages. Now, this is just the book. This doesn't have front matter. It doesn't have back matter. It won't have that yet. Right now, I'm just formatting my manuscript. So with the 334 pages that I have, now I want to make sure that my inside margins, my outside margins, the gutter, the top, the bottom, that they are all set up the way that I want them. And the way that you do that is you would go to Format in Word, and then you would go to Document. And in the document, you're going to have two tabs. You're going to have your Margins tab, and you're going to have your Layout tab. And so with this, I recommend, I hate to say eyeballing it, but that's really where this will come in. You're going to have to just trust your eyes on whether or not something looks good, because every book is going to be different in terms of what you decide is going to be in the header, what you decide is going to be in the footer, and how far away that information is from the actual manuscript itself. So for me, I just put the same top and bottom of 0.88 inches. Again, you can just measure that yourself. And for me, it's not as relevant in this instance because if you notice, I don't have anything in my header and footer in Word. And that is because I put a lot of the information I'm going to be talking to you about while I'm in Word. I actually do a lot of that stuff in InDesign, and I'll show you why I do it in InDesign. Again, I'm going to spend less time on that program only because it's one that it's a monthly charge the same way Microsoft Word is, and I don't want you to think that you need to have InDesign in order to do what you can easily do in Google Docs, in Microsoft Word, or any other word processing program that you have. So then you would have your inside margins. So the part that scares people is the inside, the outside, and the gutter. What is that? What does it mean? What do I need it for? You're scaring me now. So in a nutshell, think of it this way, okay? You take a book, right? And when you're reading a book, naturally you open it, okay? And if you pay attention to the gutter, the gutter is considered the part that's right here where the spine is, right in between where the pages turn. That amount of space, when you've got the book closed and there's like glue here that's keeping all the pages together, and stuff like that, so that when you're opening it, what happens is the words get closer to the curve, unless you like literally break the back of your spine in order to really open the book, which I hate doing and I never do. But think of that as the gutter. Okay, that's the part wedged in there that you want to make sure when you have your book printed that your words are so close to the very center that a person opening your book can't read the words when they get to that point and they're reading naturally left to right. You want to give enough space so that they can read that. And again, if you scroll down to the last page, you will see margins there, and you will see that depending on how many pages your manuscript is. So this is why it's important to know and to format your pages this way, because this will give you the answer on what your gutter needs to be in order for when someone opens your book, the words aren't going so far into the center that they can't read it. Okay, so if your manuscript, in my case, is between 301 to 500 pages, that means my inside gutter is 6.25. And what happens is Word, they round it up to 0.63, which again is fine for me. So it's fine that they did it that way. And then what you have is the inside is just a little buffer. Okay. So you want to give yourself a little bit of a buffer. So if you look at the image here on the screen, you've got like these like dot pixelated things in here in the center of the two pages. If you look just to the left, or just to the right, there's a little bit of a space. That's for your own like personal safety. Because yes, they tell you like 0.625, but in my mind, is that enough space if it's a 300-page book versus if it's a 500-page book? So they have inside margins where you could give yourself a little more room so that you can say, okay, do the gutter of 0.63, but then add another 0.13 on top of that. So really my gutter is closer to 0.76 worth of a gap, just so that I can make sure that when I open that book, whether I open it on the first page or I open it to the middle or to the last page, the reader is always going to be able to read whatever is on the page on the left facing or the right facing. Okay, and now your outside margins are the margins literally on the furthest outside of the book. So again, if you pick up, any book, it's this margin here and this margin here. So how much space do you want to put here? You don't want to put too much. You don't want to put too little. So in their chart, they put at least. So you don't want to put less than 0.25. 0.25 is going to have the words going way too far to the edge. And again, it's going to be off-putting and jarring to the reader, because if they are reading fantasy, if your genre is whatever your genre is of your book, you want to make sure that you look at it and you see, do they really have, the words going that far to the edge of the page? No, they don't. They give it a much more comfortable feel. And what I do is, or if you see in this instance, I made it almost the same as what my gutter is, 0.65. Perfect. I'm looking at this here. It looks good. You want to make sure in your pages with multiple pages that it mirrors, because you want Word to treat your document as if you're opening it like a book, and you want to do it to the whole document. So then you want to quickly just go to layout. And I know I'm moving quickly here, so it's just because we have so much to go over, and I want to make sure I get it all in before I have to um, end the stream. So I want to make sure I get everything in there, and everything that you need to know. Um, and I'm actually going to check real quickly just to confirm that I know when the next stream begins. Yeah, okay, so I've got about 30 minutes. Okay, so now just make sure that in the layout, the only thing you have to really worry about is that your headers and footers, this section here, that they're different, odd, and even. And again, this is because, and I don't have it on here, but you may want to do it in yours if you're not using InDesign, is if you want, if you look at any book, again, you'll notice that on the left facing, and that's what the common term that a lot of people will use when they're formatting a book is, there are left facing pages and right facing pages. And that literally means when you open the book, the page on the left is facing you and the page on the right is facing you. So typically your left facing pages, the header, whether you put this information in the header or the footer, if you put your author name, it will always be on the left facing page. So if I were to put something in the header on the left, every time I scroll down, the left page would have my author name. And then let's say if on the right facing page, I wanted to put the name of the book, then always on the right facing page would be the name of the book. So you want there to be odd and even, so that happens. And then you would do page numbers. So then you would put page numbers again in the header or the footer, and that won't happen with the same page number in the header or the footer the way it does with the information. So you don't have to worry about that. So once you do all that, you shouldn't, like I said, you shouldn't have to do this again. It's a lot of information to cram in there. You want to make sure that the formats you use for, a series of books, or, all of your books, if you have a series, are all the same. So you do it once and you don't have to do it again. The next time you have a manuscript that you want to take on this look, all you have to do is, again, just go to File, go to Page Setup, and then select the one that you want. So if I wanted this to be something different, if it didn't open up on paperback novel and it was opened up on what it typically is, which is 8.5 by 11 US letter, I would just come in here and I would select paperback novel, and then it would just format it to that. And again, with the margins, if I go to layout and I drop down margins, it would be right here. I could either do custom margins, but it would be saved here because I've used it before. These are all of the different things that I've used in the past and some default that they have. But the one that you set up would be in this drop down, and you would just select it. And again, it would just format it all this way. So you don't have to go through, entering all that information. The only thing you might need to change is if your page count is lower than 301 or higher than 500, then you would need to go into the gutter section and change it to whatever is in the margins section there, because the margins would be different. But supposing that, all the books in that series are all within that range of page numbers, you're good to go. And those page numbers, those pages, they do need to be inclusive of the front and back matter. So you will need to know what that information is. And we're actually going to go into that in a second. But what I want to do first is say, and you might have already chosen this ahead of time, but some people don't think about it. They just use the default font when they start writing. They don't really think about things like, what is the actual font going to be? So I want to suggest that you do that you change the font to whatever you want it to be. And one of the recommendations I make is, if you're doing fiction, it should be a serif font. And if you're doing nonfiction, it should be a sans serif font. And what that basically means is, sans serif means without the flare in the font. So it's going to look hard. It's going to be hard lines. So you want that for nonfiction, because it's not so much about the beauty of the way the words look on the page. It's more about the information that you need to absorb. So that's why usually, or typically, nonfiction uses those hard lines like an Arial font. But if you want to do something that's more, fiction, whether it's romance or fantasy or sci-fi, typically you would use a font that has a bit more personality to it. And there are, several different ones. There's Garamond, or, there's any number that you can use. And I recommend finding the one you like, making sure you like it, remembering what it is, like don't forget what it is. But you could always just open your previous manuscript to take a peek if you don't remember, to make sure that you use that. Find the right font size that you want. And when you have the pages formatted the way you do, which here they are formatted the way I want them, it helps for me to be able to now see if this is something that I like, something that is too hard for me to read on the page. Is there enough, spacing? And we're going to get into that right now, actually. But once you've picked your font, and your font for your chapter heading doesn't have to be the same font as for the actual chapter itself. You decide that, you make all those decisions on how you want this thing to look. Again, you don't even have to hit enter, as far as I did, to get the chapter to the center of the page, but I will go over how I did that as well. But once you've done everything that I just said, now you want to go into format again, but this time you want to go to paragraph. And here is where you're going to make some other key decisions and key choices with your story. So with your manuscript, one of the things is you want to make sure that you're in justified mode, meaning that you don't want the lines to be jagged at all. Usually you might see that in nonfiction, but even in nonfiction, sometimes they also use justified as well. You just want to make sure it's a block of text on the page. It just looks better. It looks neater. It's not as distracting from the actual story you're trying to get the reader to read. So make sure that you're using justified. For your indentation, you want, this is how you can actually fix the first line being indented properly without having to do it yourself for every single paragraph. You would just go to special, first line, put 0.03, and then it should do that for all of them for you. And then something else that I do, this is a personal preference, is I do the line spacing at multiple. Um, and then I do it at 1.3. You can play around with that as much as you want. I would not do double space or 1.5 spacing, simply because that might be a bit too much of a gap in between each line. But I will, Nick, I will be touching on how I do the chapters. That's going into chapter headers and styles. So I will show you how to do that. I just noticed your question. So hang tight, because that's coming up right after I finish this, going over this. And then something else quickly that you want to make sure is you have both of these boxes checked off, where you don't want to have any weird kind of spacing between the paragraphs or the styles. You want to make sure that every paragraph is matching up to how you want it to look. And then lastly, in the line and page breaks, you want to make sure with pagination that you have your widows and orphan control box ticked. And that's just helpful, so that you make sure that when you get to the bottom of a page, what Word does is it finagles the way the words are lining up on the page, so that you don't have a straggling starting paragraph on the bottom of a page. It will literally just move it so that that starting paragraph is on the top of the next page. It just, again, looks prettier, looks better. I'm not a fan of hyphenating. I feel like hyphenating, again, is something that's more of a nonfiction thing, not a fiction thing, but I have seen it in fiction. So this is up to your own personal preference. I always check off don't hyphenate. I don't want anything hyphenated in my book. I don't like seeing it. I feel like it's just, it wigs me out. But it's a personal preference. If you want to have the hyphens in there, don't check that. But if you don't want them, by all means, check it off. And then one last thing I want to let you know, you may not want all of these things that you do to be default. So if you don't want it to be the default setting, meaning you're going to use Microsoft Word for a plethora of other things, and these default settings won't really help you in other things that you're doing, by all means, do not click set as default, just click OK. But if all you're going to be using Word for is doing novels, so you want, similarly to the page setup and the margins, you want this information to be retained as well, so you don't have to consistently go in here and make these changes, then click set as default. So that way you don't have to do that, and you know that every time you go in here, it's going to automatically be justified and all of those things. So now let's quickly go into how I do these chapters, because you don't want to have to, again, recreate the wheel. There always needs to be a shortcut here. And the shortcut is really in styles. So you want to open up your styles panel in whatever your word processor is. And with styles, what that really is it allows you to take a certain section of your work and style it a specific way every time. So that way you don't have to remember how you wanted it to look. If you're deep into your novel and you have, maybe you have letters that are in there and you want your letters indented, a specific way. And I mean, like someone hand wrote a letter to someone and you want it indented differently. You want the font to be different. You want the style, everything to be different. You can format that, create it as a new style, and then every time you start to do that particular thing, you just click the format and it does it for you. In this case, you can see I have heading 1, and you can see that it's already been formatted here. So what you would typically do is, when you start, do your chapter the chapter heading the way you want it. So if you want it to be in the middle of the page, hit enter. And in this case, you do want to hit enter. It's not like a page break where you want to separate the end of a chapter from the beginning of the next. Just hit enter all the way down to where you want your chapter heading to be. then either write out chapter 1, do a Roman numeral 1 here, however you want the chapter. If it's a title, it could be a title instead of an actual title, instead of just a number, whatever it is you want. Do it in the font size, do it style it perfectly, however you want it to be. And then what you want to do is you want to copy from the top all the way down. You want to make sure you highlight all of this and copy all of this. And then you want to click new style. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy it the way you have it, all the way down to how far you indented it. Okay, so it's going to have all that information for you, so that when you click now and you write 2 in your next chapter, all you would have to do is come over to, and in here it already has it up here, so I don't even have to open the styles panel on the side. I would just click this and it would format it, because it would remember, and it would leave it at the number that I set it to, but it would do the format all the way that you want it. And that way you don't have to, again, say, how many times did I hit enter on this chapter? Did I do it 10 times? Did I do it 12 times? And then like, you don't want to have to do that. You just create it as a style and let the program do it itself. So that way it's the same every time and you don't have to play a guessing game here on how to do it. So now let's quickly look at what you should have in your front matter and what you should have in your back matter. Now for this, I'm going to switch over to InDesign, and I'm going to show you, this is how I typically use InDesign, because I don't typically use it. I don't typically do the front matter or the headers and footers and everything in Word. I actually do it in InDesign, but you can do it in Word, and I recommend, or any other word processor that you have, totally do that, because it is a bit more intricate and detailed when you do it in InDesign. But I just learned how to do it on here. I taught myself how to do it on here, so that's why I do it. Um, so if you happen to have, Adobe Creative Cloud Suite and you have InDesign, great. If you don't worry about it. Again, a lot of what I'm going to show you here, I'm going to tell you how you can do it in Word. For instance, here, let's go over what would be considered a part of your front matter. So I give you a list of all the things that you can have for your front matter in that downloadable document. I put in bold the ones that are like must have. What's not in bold, you don't really need it. It's up to you if you use it, if you include it. Not every book needs to have it, okay? One of the things every book does need to have is the first title page. I mean, that's kind of like a given, right? So you can easily create this in Word. You don't have to create this in InDesign. I did, just because, I have InDesign, I know how to use it. So for me, it made more sense to just do my front and back matter in InDesign. And I will again show you how and why I do this, so that I don't have to spend a lot of the time that I spend just now in Word to do it. But again, if I didn't have InDesign, I would be doing all of this in Word and it would be no problem. So here's my cover page. Another option you can have is to have a half title page, which a lot of books have. And I noticed that a half title page is typically what an author will use when they do a book signing. So I love book signings. I've gone to hundreds of book signings in the past. And I notice when they have you open the hardcover and they do the jacket, they will actually have the jacket hide the first title page and leave it so that the author can easily open it to the half title page, which is typically just the title of the book and the author's name. And it gives them a lot of white space in the center to just sign however they want to sign their name. So, that's what I've always seen a half title page be used for. Again, it's a personal preference on whether you want to have it or not, because you could easily just sign your name, in this big white space that I have. Everyone's different. I don't have a half title page. If I did, all it would mean is I would just have Daxton and then my name at the bottom, and there would be nothing in the middle. That's what a half title page is. So it's up to you on whether or not you have it. Then you would have your copyright page. Must have, must have, must have, especially when you give it to like an Amazon KDP, they're going to look and search to make sure you've got an ISBN number listed there, because if you don't, then they won't allow it to go public. And they even, I believe, may not allow you to order proof copies either. You need to have that ISBN number. So make sure you get one registered. Make sure you have an ISBN number to assign to your book. And this language that I have in here, and again, this is something you can easily create in a Word document. Just make one page, make this, use all the margins and all the dimensions and the inside gutter and all of that stuff. And as you do each one, just save it. Save this page by itself. Call it first title page template, right? Save it as a template. Then when you're actually going to do your manuscript, open that first title page template, hit save as, save it as the title of your book, date it. I always like to date myself so that way I know just how old it is. If it's like something from several years ago, I'm going to know it's not the most recent version of what I'm looking for. So save it with the title, save it with that. And then you have that version that you can now create as a PDF, but we'll get into that in a minute. But so each time you do a different section, just save it as that one page, save it as a template. So that way you can go back in there. So like, let's say you're doing a second book, right? All you have to do now is open the template, hit save as, save it as the title of that second book. So it would be called copyright, second book title, the date. And then all you'd have to do is come in here and change the name from, in my case, saying Daxton to whatever your second book is. And then your ISBN number, update it to whatever the ISBN number is. You might want to change, the date where it says first printing. And like I was saying earlier, this information here, I literally just Googled copyright language for a fiction novel, found the one that was the most short and succinct, and that's the one I used. So because they all mostly read the same, so you don't have to worry about that. I actually have a publishing name that I like to write under, which is PD Books. But you don't have to have that there. Just look at a copyright page on any of your favorite books and see what information they list there. You don't have to go into all of that detail. The only things you really need is like, this little paragraph here. You want to have, the word copyright. You want to have the ISBN number. All the other stuff that's here is just extra stuff that is not really necessary. Then you would have a dedication page, which I have right here. Short, sweet, simple. You don't need a dedication page. Most books do have a dedication page, so it's up to you on whether or not you include one. And then I go right into the novel after that. But there are other things that you can include. Some people who write fiction novels, their chapters have actual titles to them. So if they do, then you'll want to have a table of contents, right? Some people might have a friend write a foreword for their book about any number of things, so you may want to include that. You may have other novels that you've written in that series or in general. You may want to include that there. Now that you can include in the front, you can include it in the back, you can include it in both places. The other works page, where you put it is up to you. And if you include it, it's up to you. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to here, because we're about to get into the blank page part of this. So thinking about a book, again, when you open any book, every book you will ever open, there is a facing right page. The title page is always on the right, which is another reason why I love using InDesign, is because it automatically does that for me. It's formatting it literally the way I would open the book. So if I were to open my book, the title, the full title, would always be on the right facing page. And what that also means is the first chapter should always be on the right facing page. You don't want someone to be opening your book and they're reading the first chapter on the left facing page. It's just weird. It just is. You don't have to worry about where the chapter starts on any other chapters, but your first chapter, you want to make sure is on your right facing page. And so occasionally, depending on how much front matter you have, you may find that if you don't add a blank page like I had to right here, chapter 1 would have started on the left. And I didn't want that. So you want to make sure that your first chapter starts on the right facing page. So to make sure of that, then you may want to include a blank page. And that literally means create a document, save it, a Word document, Google Doc, whatever the case may be, call it blank page and save it. And that will literally be what you will inject into your PDF should you need it when you go to create this PDF file that we're going to be creating in just a few minutes. So that's all your front matter, right? So now we've got your back matter. Now, literally, I feel the only thing you need in your back matter is about the author. Anything else that you put in there, it's your, again, personal preference. So for me, I do have a few things, I think, in my back matter. So I will scroll quickly past this, past my novel here. Okay, so here is what I have at the end. Here ends book 1. So I have a learn more page. So this is where I include any social media links that I may have, anything like that, where there's somewhere else that the reader can find me. So you may want to have a learn more page. But I will caveat that and say if you have an about the author page, you can easily put these links in that section. So you don't need to have two separate sections if you don't want. Um, I I believe you should, and I feel you really, really need to have it at least about the author page in the back of your book, if nothing else. Make sure that you include that. But something else you can include, which I included in my book, is a sneak peek of the next book. So again, I wanted to make sure that that started on the right facing page and they didn't see this, the fifth compass adventure continues in book 2. I wanted that to intentionally wanted it to be on the right. So I included a blank page to make sure of that. And then I included another one again to make sure that that chapter sneak peek that I'm giving starts on the right page. Again, it's only for the first chapter of anything that you write, whether it's a sneak peek or the actual book, that you want to make sure starts on the right facing page. Chapter 2, chapter 3, if they start on the left, doesn't matter. But the first chapter, you want to make sure it starts on the right. So I included 2 chapters here. And then again, right here, I have about the author. If you have nothing else in the back of your book, I feel strongly that you should at least have that. And again, you want to just save this as one page, title it about the author template, right? Put all you want, because if you look again at your favorite author books and you look at all of their about the author page, typically they're identical. They're exactly the same. If there's anything different, it's because they had a major life change that they felt that they wanted to change at that particular point in time. But 99.9% of the time, your about the author page is going to be the same. So you don't need to recreate and rewrite your author page every time. Save it as a template. If you have any major changes you want to make to it, make it to the template, hit save as, then save it as that. And then you want to end your book on a blank page. But just really quickly, for the back matter, other things you can add is an acknowledgements page. You may want to thank people who helped you along the way, like editors, cover artists, friends and family, whatever the case may be. So you might want to have an acknowledgements page. Again, that may change from book to book, but having a template of the acknowledgements page doesn't hurt. So you'll want to create, again, one page, save that file as an acknowledgements page. And that would basically be what you would have in the back of your book. You may want an author photo in there to have it beside your, or on the, next to your about the author page. You can totally inject that in there as well. It'll be in black and white. So consider that if you do want to have your picture there, that it may not show very well if it's in black and white. Because once you go and delve into color, the cost of the book will increase dramatically. So you want to make sure you're sticking to black and white. And again, you want to make sure you have a blank page at the end of your document, because the last thing you want is something to go funky with the printing of it. You get it, and for whatever reason, the about the author page got lost, and it's not in the final manuscript because there was a funky thing that happened with the Amazon printing when it happened. So just to be on the safe side, always put a blank page at the end of your manuscript. So let me just look at any questions. Um, can you use any font in print as opposed to on ebooks? So with print, what I would do is I would Google the most popular font for a specific genre. Because, and again, it's because you don't want to jar the reader. If the reader is someone who loves romance, there might be like 5 top fonts for romance that you want to make sure you use, because you want the reader, when they open it, to feel comfortable, invited, and you don't want them to be distracted by something as simple as giving them a font they've never seen before when they've read that genre. So, and how that also helps you is, if it's the most popular and most used font, that it's acceptable and okay to use, and you don't want to run into any licensing issues. So what I've typically done is, sometimes, not all the time, in the copyright page of a professionally edited, like top 5 publisher book, they will actually tell you the name of the font that they used. So I will look up that font if it's not one I recognize, and I will try to see if there is an equivalent to it. And then I will see if that equivalent to it is one that's a popularly used font within that specific genre or community. And then that's the one that I will use. Yes, they do. And I will give the example of covers for fantasy. Okay, one of the fonts that's typically used on covers is Cinzel, right? And it's because it looks fantasy. So it's not uncommon to see Cinzel used as the title for on the cover of most fantasy books, because when you see it, you instantly know that's a fantasy book, right? And it's the same thing with the inside. When you see a certain font in a certain way, you're about to read fantasy, or you're about to read mystery, or and it also lends itself to the color of the page. So we didn't really go into the color of the page, but you will have options when you decide to print your book using like Amazon KDP. They'll give you cream and I think white are the 2 options. I don't think there's a third. I think there's just 2. You want to make sure you use cream. White is that smooth feeling paper, and that's the one you would see with nonfiction. You wouldn't typically see that for paperback anyway. You would typically see it as a cream. It has that really rough feel to it. It has a lighter color. It's not as white and bright and harsh on the reader. You might see white pages used in hardback. When people have hardback covers printed, that might be using white paper, but even then, typically it would be using cream, again, because you just want to give them the same feel that they would get from like a Tolkien book or a Sanderson book, even though you're not using their professional people. You want to try to get as close to how their book looks as possible. So that's why I recommend pulling books off the shelves, really looking at the finite details, how the spacing is between the lines, where their chapter headings start. Do they start at the top? Do they start halfway down? Is there a reason for that? Maybe they have a black and white illustration above the chapter heading, and that's why they're so far down on the page. There could be any number of reasons why they do what they do, where the page numbers are. Look at that, look at your options, see which one you then like when you start doing this formatting, and just make sure it's the same for every book. So that way they know every book that they read in that series is going to have the same look and feel throughout. You don't want to jar the reader. You want them to be focused on your story. But I think that's all I have time for, because I think the next panel is going to start. But if you download the, like I said, the document that I have in the description, you will see then how to take all of these things that we just did and create the PDF that you can then upload into Amazon KDP. And so, you guys, thank you all for being here. I should have talked a bit faster because I didn't really realize how much information I had. I hope I gave you enough information for you to use. And you can actually find me on like Twitch TV or on Twitter or anything like that if you're looking for me and if you want to ask me any further questions. But now I think we're going to jump into the next panel. So you guys go have fun, enjoy that. And like I said, thank you for stopping by.
Until I say so, basically. Okay. Like that banner shows up, but you're not actually live until I've clicked one more button, and thus, oh, but, whoa, crud, we jumped in on the end of her thing. Oh, please work. Yes, okay, great. And we are live.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is L. Diane Wolf, senior editor at Dancing Lemur Press. I am going to be reading from two different books today by two authors that we have that have books, another book coming out later, either this year or the beginning of next year. First one I'm going to read from is Damian Larkin's Big Red. He's actually moderating a panel later this afternoon. And so I'm going to read a little bit of that. I'll give you the synopsis real quick. We have always been here. Traumatized by the effects of compression travel, soldier Darren Laughlin holds the key to the fate of Earth's Martian